Good evening and welcome to the 2017 election hustings debate, coming to you live from the University of Gloucestershire's Park campus here in Cheltenham. I'm Dawson, head of the media school, and we're delighted to be co-hosting this event this evening with BBC Radio Gloucestershire. So I'm joined by the BBC's David Smith. In a moment, we'll be putting your questions to the panellists. And those of you who are at home joining us by Facebook Live or Tone Radio, you can join in the debate too by using the hashtag UOGdebate. But before we do that, our students have been out with the candidates listening to their key campaign points.
On the national side of things, there's no doubt that we as a country are going to have to deliver the best possible deal for our country. So the key campaigning point is, as you'll have heard a million times, who do we want to be Prime Minister who's leading those important negotiations? Because that is going to be the prism through which a lot of other issues are viewed. That's the first thing. Locally, I've got a bunch of things that I'm really passionate about delivering. First, on the issue of opportunity. So on cyber innovation, we won £22 million worth of funding to make Cheltenham, to put Cheltenham absolutely front and centre in the cyber world. So this is about cyber startups here in town, creating opportunities for young people and really boosting our economy. Second, I'm really keen that we have to get the best possible outcome for our local health services. So we lost blue light nighttime A&E at Cheltenham General Hospital. We've got to go about turning that around now and improving 24/7 provision there. Education. Cheltenham schools are underfunded compared to the national average. Schools are under pressure. We have fantastic schools here in Cheltenham, but they can't run on air. They need money. And I want to get the best possible financial settlement for them. And there's a bunch of other things, from social media to potholes, but I think those first three are really important.
The Green Party are different because we're always looking at the long term. We're not just looking at the next 2 years or the next 5 years. So most of our policies are looking at 15, 20, 50 years down the line. We're looking at things like standing up for young people, for making sure they get a fair deal. So we would be cutting tuition fees, for example. We'd be looking to lessen the effect of Brexit on students as well, replacing some of the funding that they get. We'd be looking at reinstituting the maintenance grant for students as well. Talking of Brexit, we'd be looking at giving people a say on any Brexit deal, so there'd be a chance for a second referendum once a deal is known, because at the moment we're just voting on the unknown. Should we go or should we stay? Well, actually, let's know the facts and then decide. So again, we're looking further into the future. And the environment, I mean, ultimately, none of the things that we can do in our society are possible unless we can all actually breathe clean air. So we'd be looking at tackling emissions, especially in our cities, making sure that we can reduce deaths from dirty and polluted air. So we want to make sure that we've actually got a future where we can actually have an economy, have an NHS, have education as well. So the environment has to be first and foremost. But besides that, we're not just a short-term party, we're looking at the long term, we're looking at our young people, we're looking at the environment we live in.
People are concerned about their local A&E, they're concerned about local businesses, they're concerned about local schools, but those connect to national issues because the overall NHS budget is one of the things that's created the deficit here that's challenging services here. It's the national funding formula deal on schools that is threatening local schools with hundreds of thousands less money for teaching and for support for pupils. And it's the hardline version of Brexit that Theresa May is pursuing that's actually threatening local export businesses, in fact, the economy as a whole. So we have to connect the two. There is no separation between the local and the national. They're intimately connected. And so, for instance, the fact that we got a great funding deal for mental health just before the end of the coalition, which is now being eroded under this government, and trying to get a new funding settlement in place for the whole of the NHS and social care, including mental health, that will actually take the NHS out of being a political football and have, if necessary, a new tax, a dedicated tax just for the NHS and social care, if necessary at a higher level, to make sure it has the funds that we think it deserves and is comparable to what healthcare and social care gets in other countries.
I think this country is at a crossroads, rather similar to the end of the Second World War. When you think where you have a situation where nurses have to go to food banks, where parents are being asked for money from the schools, where the public debt is going up and up, it's nearly doubled in the last 7 years. where our railways are owned by foreign companies and not by the country. We're told the economy is strong, but I think actually there are serious weaknesses in the economy of this country, and that's why people are seeing their wages stagnant. There's a reason for that, and it's a reason because the economy is being run in the wrong way. Labour are very concerned about a healthy environment for the people of this country. I think the issue of air pollution from diesel cars has come to the fore, and we will certainly seek to address that issue, reduction in diesel emissions. We're also concerned about global warming, and we want to see a much greener energy policy in this country, so a use of renewables and less dependence on fossil fuels.
And we'll be hearing a lot more about all of those issues, I'm sure, in the next hour. So, a big welcome to Martin Horwood for the Liberal Democrats, Keith White for Labour, Adam Van Coverdon for the Greens, and Alex Chalk for the Conservative Party.
And our first question tonight comes from Ruth Nolman. Ruth is from Cheltenham and she works in local government.
Good evening. What type of Brexit will you support?
Alex.
Okay, so the Brexit we want to see, first of all, I think is one which is going to be global, outward-facing, tolerant, internationalist. And the Prime Minister made crystal clear that, yes, we are having Brexit, but we are not turning our back on the world, and that is critically important. Of course, we've got to get a good deal with the European Union, but this must also be a Brexit which ensures that we reach out to other parts of the world. And crucially, this as well, this must not be the moment when we start rolling back on green protection. This must not be the moment when we start rolling back on labour protections, and the Prime Minister made that clear. I think the decision having been made, by the way, I was a Remainer, I don't resile from a single argument, but the decision has been made, we've got to get the right people negotiating for us, which I happen to think is the Prime Minister, of course, and go out and secure the best, open, tolerant, internationalist deal for our country.
Keith.
The narrow margin means to me a soft Brexit. I don't think we can go back on the decision. It was voted on, and we should respect that decision by the British people. But I think it was very narrow, a very narrow margin, and that means a soft Brexit. We want to preserve our economic ties with Europe. We do 44% of our exports with Europe, less than 2% with India. You just look at the map. Where's Europe? Where's India? We do most of our deals with Europe. And so we should seek to preserve our exports and relations with Europe. I think that we must guard against loss of workers' rights and environmental protections. These must be maintained at all costs, and we should not let people on the right of the Tory party destroy those.
Thank you. Martin.
Well, I voted Remain, and I'm still of the opinion that Britain would be better off remaining inside the European Union, not least because of the restriction on life chances that almost any version of Brexit will put on young people. And I think it is your generation, as students, have been somewhat cheated by the outcome we've got. But I don't think even people who voted Leave in good conscience, and many people did, they voted for the extra 350 million a week for the NHS, which isn't going to happen. They voted in many cases on an assurance that we'd stay within the single market. And I think the extreme version of Brexit that Theresa May is pursuing, taking us out of the single market that buys 44% of our exports, that will make us more distant from the European Union even than non-EU countries like Norway and Switzerland. And it would be a catastrophe for this country, let alone rejecting the rulings of the European Court of Justice, taking us out of the customs union, whole series of potential arrangements we could have tried to hang on to that Theresa May seems intent on taking us away from. And she's pursuing the negotiations in this really aggressive, nationalistic and confrontational way. I mean, these threats of going to war with Spain over Gibraltar that we've heard from a former Conservative Party leader and things like this. So she needs to go on a negotiating course fast. But I would preserve the closest possible relationship with Europe, and I'd give us the option, if the deal isn't good at the end, to have a referendum in which we have the option to stay in after all.
Martin, thank you. Adam.
I think, like with the Conservative government, my view is that the Brexit that I want probably isn't possible. I think the Brexit that a lot of people who voted Leave, that they were sold, isn't possible. Can we stay in the single market? Can we still have freedom of movement? Can we still have the environmental protections? Can we still have the EU organisations based in London? We're not going to have any of those things. The EU has no incentive to give us a good deal. If we leave their club, they're not going to allow us to come back and pop in on Saturdays. They're not going to let us do that because everyone would want to do it. They want us to pay the money, they want us to contribute, they want us to put in our efforts, they want us to put in our MEPs, and they want us to be a full member. There is no way we're going to get the kind of pie-in-the-sky deal that some of the Brexiters offered beforehand, and I completely agree with Martin. Let's give people another say when the deal's on the table, and if that deal looks like an absolute dog's dinner, we all get the chance to say no.
OK, we'll come back to the... Back to panel for the moment. Back to you, David.
Well, of course, the type of Brexit that we're talking about, which is Ruth's question here, was not actually on the ballot paper. That's the big issue at large here. The type of Brexit that we would or would not have got was not on that ballot paper. And just to put a bit of context into what the candidates were saying, the national positions of the parties, Theresa May for the Conservative favours a clean Brexit, leaving the single market and the customs union, allowing the UK to strike trade deals with other countries around the world. Labour, for their part, promised to scrap the Conservatives' Brexit white paper, putting a strong emphasis on retaining the benefits of the single market and the customs union. The Lib Dems are promising a referendum on any final deal. They're fighting for Britain at the very minimum, they say, to remain a member of the single market. And the Green Party, as part of their 10 key pledges, something very similar indeed, demanding a democratic right to vote on whatever deal is negotiated for Britain's departure from the EU. I should encourage our audience here to put your hands in the air if you want to contribute on this question. We'll be with you in just a moment or so. But Ruth, it was your question, so what type of Brexit do you want to see?
Well, I'm just very concerned about the future of small and medium-sized companies who don't have the option to go to India or to America to get their trade deals. They need to trade with somebody who is nearby and where there aren't any barriers. And so I'm just very concerned about the future of those companies in our country who provide a lot of the wealth.
So for that reason, hard Brexit, soft Brexit, which sort of line are you taking?
Well, it needs to be a soft Brexit where we've still got access to the customs union or to the single market.
Okay. All right, soft Brexit, says Ruth. Anybody else got a thought on that one? Soft Brexit, hard Brexit? Any other thoughts on that? We'll get the thoughts of our panel, I think. Anne, what do they think of this?
Alex, SMEs, how are they going to survive if they can't trade with their neighbours?
Well, I think that's the point that's made is absolutely the right one. We've got to have the closest possible access to the single market and the customs union. There's no question about that. It is an important market for us.
That's not what you voted for.
Well, no, absolutely. No, absolutely it is. You see, the key thing is, though, the question about whether we can stay in the single market. What the European Union has said, and this is a position for them, is that if you want to be members of the single market, not the same as access to, you've got to accept all four freedoms, so goods, services, labour and capital. In other words, there would have to be complete free movement of labour. Now, my view is if there was some derogation from that, if they were to say we could have some kind of emergency break, then of course we could remain a member of the single market. But given that that's not going to be allowed, then that does inevitably put us in some difficulties. But the key thing is we've got to negotiate an arrangement with the single market which provides us access. And I think ultimately that's the deal we will arrive at. We will probably end up paying some money in return for access which is acceptable. That's what
Martin,
I'm hoping for.
if I can pick up with you. So talking of businesses, so both the Liberal Democrats and the Greens want a second referendum. Isn't this just going to extend the period of uncertainty that businesses are complaining about at the moment?
I think I've worked in a business in Cheltenham that traded in other parts of Europe. And one of the great things about being within the European Union was that you could have not only no tariffs, but no non-tariff barriers. You didn't have the kind of problems with customs that you have trading outside the European Union. That's probably the single most important thing for small and medium-sized businesses, as the lady who asked the question said. And I think the point about the second referendum, we're going to have uncertainty as it's not clear what the deal is. It's not even clear if we're going to get a deal. I mean, it is quite possible we might reach the end of the line and one country out of 27 vetoes whatever arrangement is in place, and we don't get any kind of deal at all. And you're perfectly entitled to buy tickets for a transatlantic liner, but if you see an iceberg coming towards you, I suggest that you should also have the right to turn round if it doesn't look as though the journey is working out the way you planned.
We're going to move on to the second question now, so David.
So the next question comes from Victoria Atherstone. Victoria.
As Cheltenham mainly voted to remain inside the European Union, do you think those residents will vote Liberal Democrats by default due to the fact that the Lib Dems are the only party fighting to remain inside the EU while challenging a hard and damaging Brexit?
Martin, I must come to you first.
Well, obviously, yes. Well, I hope so. And of course, the Cheltenham is always a two-horse race here between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. Well, I'm
There are
sorry,
four
it is
parties
actually.
each
If
time.
everybody had voted Labour or Green at the last general election had voted Lib Dem, we wouldn't have a Tory MP now who had voted with the hardliners on Brexit every time it really mattered. And the truth is, if we are going to challenge a hard Brexit, we do need more MPs who take that position, not those who toe the party line. And it's all very well for Alex to say that he would love to have the closest possible relationship, but you voted for Brexit, you voted to trigger Article 50 in the full knowledge that that's not what Theresa May was pursuing, that she was pursuing a really extreme version of Brexit in which we were definitely heading out of the single market.
Adam, in some areas there have been a series of relationships created. You're standing and the Liberal Democrats are both standing here.
Yeah, exactly. So we've tried to have a conversation on a national level. The Greens have absolutely led that conversation where the other parties have kind of, been entrenched in their partisan stance. And there has been some movement. The Lib Dems have had, there was one reciprocal deal in Brighton where the Lib Dems have stood down, and we absolutely thank them for it. But we could
down in your one and only seat.
But the thing is, if we want the things that we want, which are so important, the environmental protections, the radical environmental protections that we want, we need more Green MPs. We need 2, 3, and we need to build that momentum. And we were quite happy to do a deal with the Lib Dems where somebody stands down from the Lib Dems somewhere where we need to get an MP, and we could stand down in 5, 10 or 15 places, but that was rejected at the very top from the Lib Dems, which I think is a big shame. But I think maybe after this election, if we see the Tory landslide that's predicted, maybe those conversations carry on to the next election.
Keith, what's your view on what we're talking about here, which is tactical voting?
I think democracy is all important. So there have been referendums in the past staying in the EU, or as the EEC I think it was then, also on changes to the voting system. And that you have to accept the result. As for tactical voting, really I think you vote for what you believe in. You don't vote just in order to, because otherwise your vote doesn't mean anything to you personally. That's your vote, it's unique to you, is 100% your vote. And I really think that if you want to express what you believe in how this country should be run, you should actually think about what the different parties are offering, and they're offering really quite radically different things in this election. You should actually believe in what you want to vote, what you want. What do you want this country to be like in the next 5 years? That is the way you should approach voting in this election. Don't vote tactically. Vote for what you think. It's your vote. You're not other people's. It's your vote, and it's your vote that counts.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so in terms of which way people will vote, obviously that's a matter for them. But all I would say is this. The idea that in Cheltenham, I was one of the 56% who voted to remain, but the idea that people think that after the referendum result, we should therefore seek to thwart it if we were Remainers, I think is wrong. There was a recent ONS poll which said 64% of British people think we've now got to get on and deliver on the verdict to the British people. And Martin was, fair enough, talking about the Lib Dem position, but there are actually 2 Lib Dems who said we can't stick with the Lib Dem position of trying to block Article 50 because that stops us being Democrats. The decision was made, we've got to get on and deliver the best possible deal. And I think ultimately then, the British people are going to face a choice. Right, Brexit's happening. Who do we want to lead us in these negotiations, which include a question of whether we've got to pay £90 billion exit fee? Who do we want leading the charge for the United Kingdom? Is it going to be Theresa May or is it going to be Jeremy Corbyn? And I think most people will take the view, it's happened, let's get on with it, let's get the best deal, and let's choose the best leader to lead on negotiations.
If we look at Cheltenham as a whole, and Alex alluded to the figures there, Cheltenham voted to remain in the EU, Leave was 43.8%, Remain was 56.2% on a turnout of nearly 76%. Just to get back to the number of Victoria's question there, suggesting that those who voted Remain may well choose to go for the Liberal Democrats, who's not buying that? Who says that's not going to be the case here? Hands in the air here. Who's saying that's not the case? Let me see if I can get to you. Yes, madam, gentleman there with the microphone. Why are you thinking that's not the case? Who put their hand in the air just then? No? Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to vote Liberal Democrat because I think we should respect what the people have voted for. Even though I was Remain. Was that the question?
That was the contention was that those who are Remain will probably be more inclined to vote Liberal Democrat because they are standing up for Remain.
No, I think that we have to respect what the people have voted for, and I'll be voting Labour.
Okay. Anybody else very quickly here? Anybody else? Yes, go on.
A lot of people that voted for Remain in the referendum were young people, and I think precisely those people that aren't going to vote for the Liberal Democrats after what they did on tuition fees, unfortunately. So I think
We're going to get on to tuition fees in a minute or two, and I'll get a response from our panel on those points.
I think we probably want to move on to the third question now.
Okay, we'll move on to another question now.
Okay, let's briefly hear then, if anybody wants to respond to what we've heard just now.
I didn't hear anything.
Well, I think what I'll just say, and kind of in support of that point, although obviously I won't be voting Labour, but I can obviously sympathise that. You know, this election isn't just about Brexit for some people. I know it's kind of, I know for the Lib Dems it makes a lot of sense for them to put it in those senses, and I know that, and they've very much led on that, so I support their Brexit stance fully. But there are other reasons that people vote, and I think that's got to be respected as well. I respect people if they want to tactically vote. I mean, if people want to vote for Martin, that's absolutely fine. Martin's a great guy. I think some of the Lib Dem policies are fine. But on some things, I don't think they go far enough, and I think especially on the economy, I think we'd have some big disagreements. So I think if we had a better voting system, we'd be in a better position. And I think if you vote tactically, you're just holding up the status quo as we got at the moment. So if we ever want to get to a stage where we want proportional representation, we have to put pressure on that system until it breaks.
But the trouble is you have to elect MPs who actually support reform of the voting system. And the Conservative Party will never deliver reform of the voting system because it's simply not in their interest to do so. So it is bad under the current system that people can't really vote for what they believe in and get the result they want. Because unfortunately, in places like Cheltenham, if you vote Labour or Green, you are more likely to get a Tory MP who is not going to support voting reform. Now, it would be great if we had a system like the Irish system, which preserved a constituency link but enabled a more proportional result, then everyone could genuinely vote for what they believed in and get the results that they want as well. And those are the two elements that you have to have in a decent democracy. And that's something we're very committed to achieving. And it's instructive that voting reform has now disappeared completely from the Labour manifesto, which I think is very sad.
Can I just say
Actually, I'd like to just come in on that because there is mention of a constitutional reform or constitutional convention in the Labour manifesto, not specifically on proportional representation, but different MPs in different parties, maybe even in the Tory party, I'm not sure, but they have different views on this. And actually, I have a very strong personal view on this, and that I actually want to see a change to the way the voting system works in a general election in this country. Now, I do feel that when you're approaching in a general election, it's pointless talking about the result of the one to come, because my job as a candidate is to explain the policies of the Labour Party to the electorate, and I can tell you that is a full-time job. So I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to speculate on the results of the election, but you can look at previous election results. And it's very obvious that you can see that there are these marginal constituencies and there are these safe constituencies. And if you're in what might be called a safe constituency, where there is only one or maybe two possible results, a lot of people, their vote doesn't really count because they've got no chance to have an effect. Okay. So, you know, we want everyone's vote to count in this country.
Can I just make very briefly the point? One of the reasons why I think that some people may choose not to go with the Liberal Democrats, or they may not, but one of the reasons why they may not is because actually the policy of a second referendum is not particularly attractive if you start to look at it, even if you're a Remainer, for two reasons. One, because you might think it guarantees us an indifferent deal. Because what possible incentive can there be for the European Union to give us a good deal if they know that we're going to vote on it? As point one. And point two, and I say this as a someone with a legal background, is a big question about whether in fact Article 50 is revocable once it's issued in any event, and who ultimately would end up deciding. And this is the great irony: even if we'd voted to stay back in on the second one, who would decide whether Article 50 is revocable? Probably the European Court of Justice. Well, so that's why Vince Cable himself said that a second referendum was counterproductive and seriously disrespectful. And so that's why I think that this business of a second referendum is actually a very difficult policy and not one which is likely to endear itself to a lot of people.
Okay, we're going to move on to questions next. We're going to move on to another question.
Let's move on to question 3, and that comes from Gina.
Why is it that young people aren't voting?
Why aren't people voting, Adam?
I was a young person not very long ago, actually, although that seems to be fading into the past now as these elections go on. I can fully see why young people don't vote, because the political parties don't engage with young people. It suits the status quo again. I mean, we talked about proportional representation. We say that voting for the same old parties, you get the same old result. And it's similar for young people. We actually see that the amount of 18 to 24-year-olds voting is at a shockingly low level and staying there as well, even in this age of kind of mass media, 24-hour news and social media. You think it would be relatively easy to go out there and get information. But actually, what people see in the media, what people see on the television, in the newspapers, I think it turns them off. I think they see politicians bickering. I think you see Prime Minister's question time, and it seems irrelevant to young people's lives now. Secondly, it's the policies as well. There's a vicious circle in this country where the policies of the main parties are there to suit older people. People maybe slightly older than me, because older people turn out and vote. It makes sense. If older people vote, the parties want to talk to them. Younger people don't vote, the parties don't talk to them, younger people carry on not voting. And that's why the Green Party put a huge amount of effort into our policies and really tried to focus them on young people. Because ultimately, these policies are going to affect you more than they affect people like me. The younger you are, the more chance you're going to be breathing that dirty air further on in the future, the more chance Brexit's going to affect you, the more chance you have of, maybe not retiring because the retirement age has gone sky high. So I think I think if young people actually somehow broke that change, they turned out and they voted, they could make a huge difference. We could really shake this country up.
Adam, thank you. Okay, just to put this into context, at the last election, 2015, 43% of people aged between 18 and 24 voted. 66% was the average turnout, and 78% was the turnout between people aged over 65. And nothing very much changed, actually, from 2010 to 2015. So that's a pretty stable position. Keith, why don't young people vote?
Well, I think it's young people have different reasons. It's not that young people are all exactly the same. They have different interests. And I went to the Frog and Fiddle last week, and there were a lot of young people who were keen to vote. And I had a drink and lots of music, etc. It's good fun. But I do think the way politics is presented in this country is not very good. We got this well-known free 50 million promise about the NHS from the Brexit referendum. And it should have been made because it wasn't the government making it. It was a referendum. It wasn't a government promise because it wasn't the government that was going to come into power. It wasn't a Brexit government. So the promise shouldn't have been made. And there's this what I call gaffe politics. I heard on the radio, I think yesterday, that people were asking questions about the size of the deficit, or somebody else. I think actually Hammond got the cost of HS2 wrong. Well, the actually thing is that these politicians, they are human beings, and they are going to occasionally forget things. And yet so much fuss is made about not knowing the cost of HS2, or not knowing the cost of the deficit, or whether it's the official deficit or the unofficial deficit. I mean, I think that sort of politics is just juvenile. It's puerile, the way politics is actually presented in this country.
Martin, I'll let you respond to that.
I think there are many reasons why young people don't vote in the same numbers as older people. I think one of them is actually that perhaps they're not as politically engaged at a young age, and one of the antidotes to that would be votes at 16. I would love to see votes at 16, and that's our party policy, and make politicians actually go into schools and talk to school students about why they should vote for those political parties, and actually get them engaged in political discussion at that point, before the multiple distractions of university overtake them. And actually it is a problem that university students obviously are in two places during their year, and so voter registration is more of a problem. I would urge everybody to register to vote, and I'm not sure that the new system of individual voter registration has helped that. But I think actually it is also about the issues that we're tackling, and I agree with what Adam said about we have to look to the long term if we're to appeal to young people. And we have to look at some of the specific issues that young people raise more than the retired generation. LGBT issues, issues like mental health, and particularly adolescent mental health, issues like climate change. And I'm very proud, actually we do have some very long-term policies, Adam. We go out to 2050 on our climate change policies and targets in the Lib Dem manifesto. So it's a combination of those different things, but I just urge everybody to register to vote and turn out as much as possible.
Alex, why are they not voting?
Well, can I say, my experience has been that there has been an absolutely extraordinary shift between 2015, when I first got elected, and now. And there are really two words which contribute to that. Donald Trump. I kid you not, going round the schools, you are seeing a step change in engagement with young people. And there is also the Brexit issue as well. And I've been really heartened by that, because right at the beginning I was doing things like having to do summer courses where people come along and learn about how to do a maiden speech and all that kind of thing. And it was quite difficult to get people interested in politics. But there has been this extraordinary change now. And my prediction is that when we get to this election, you'll see a much higher engagement, because young people seem to be more focused on those sorts of issues. And I think that's very much to be welcomed.
Okay, so David from the audience.
Well, we've got a lot of students in the audience, unsurprisingly, and some who aren't students. But we're going to ask, really, why aren't young people voting? We've got students in the audience and not so students. Yes, Why aren't young people voting?
I wasn't going to raise that question. I was just going to make the point that there are two other words, Jeremy Corbyn, that's attracting a huge amount of support from young people, because Labour Party is offering a radical alternative this time, and it's engaging everyone.
All right.
So that's...
Gentleman behind you wants to... Yep.
Thank you. Well, I think, cutting to the chase, voting should be law. Australia seems to cope all right, and that would overcome all this problem about whether students vote or not.
Without getting bogged down in that, though, isn't it my democratic right to choose whether I vote or not?
Well, I think it's an area that should be looked at, because I think everybody has a responsibility, and as one of the senior generation, if you like, we've messed up our world. It's now really for the next generation.
Okay.
And
I just want to get the take of a student, if I may. I'm being presumptuous, but I think you're a student. Yeah, what do you want to say?
Well, I would call it more of a lack of faith in the system and those who are voted in. That's not for a direction at any political party. However, I mean, what can you do to support students? All we've seen is a rise in tuition fees. We can't get houses. So how would you support that?
I think that's one for our panel, the lack of faith in the political system.
Alex, what are you going to do to support students?
Well, I mean, I think the first and most important thing is about when students leave universities, they've got to be opportunities. It's a thing that I'm absolutely passionate about. I want people here to go as far as their talents can take them, and that means having jobs and opportunity. And if you look at the UK, 2014, we were the fastest growing economy in the G7. 2015, joint fastest with United States, and 2016, we were second fastest after Germany. Now, of course, we've still got problems in our society. No one's suggesting that we don't. But if we don't have the strong economy, if it's not generating jobs, I'll give you one last statistic. In 2014, Yorkshire created more jobs than the entirety of France. Okay, there's 10% unemployment in France. So we have got to create opportunities for our young people. If we don't get that right, it's not a good future for you, and it doesn't mean the tax revenues we need for excellent services like the NHS and education. So that's vital, a good, strong economy.
Adam, your answer to the question.
Well, I mean, if I take both the question and Alex's point, the point is that though young people have got higher rents, they've got less chance of buying a house, they've got less chance of actually finding somewhere suitable to rent. Young people are leaving university with more debt. Young people are living in a world where, even though we've got economic growth as a headline, they're being left behind. The Green Party are trying to make young people front and central of this manifesto that we've got coming out sometime this week at some point, because we want to tackle unfair rent. We want to abolish tuition fees. We want to reintroduce the maintenance grant. We want to make sure that young people have a fair start, because this generation is going to find it so much harder than the previous two, and I think that's the first time that we've had that in hundreds of years. We're going backwards, not forwards. And to tackle that, we need to actually give our young people a leg up, and we need to look after them.
Keith, what are the Labour Party doing? Apart from the Corbyn effect, which we've already heard about, what is the Labour Party doing to support students?
The Labour Party will scrap tuition fees. Currently, I think the average is 44,000 debt for graduating. That's a good precedent from the government. Also, the problem with housing. I also gather that actually, with inflation going up, the interest charge on that debt is also going up from 4.6% to 6.1% this September. Something for students here to bear in mind for the future. Housing, Labour promises to build 1 million homes. That is 100,000 a year, council homes, and the rest through other means, in order to address the housing issue.
Thank you. Martin, briefly.
Well, I'd still abolish tuition fees, and I would... The party's policy...
Your party obviously won't.
The party's policy actually is to start reinstating maintenance grants, starting with the poorest students. So we share that with the Green Party. And of course...
Was that in your manifesto today?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is. And I think that's one contribution, but I think there are other things that affect young people, and obviously house building is one of them. I mean, we fight great battles over house building around here, but it's one of the top priorities of the 100 billion investment fund, the Investment in Infrastructure Fund that is also in the Liberal Democrat manifesto. And the emphasis this time is not on just enabling lots of private developments on greenfield sites for relatively wealthy older people. It's on homes for rent. And actually, I'm really pleased and proud that Cheltenham's own borough council here has built the first new council housing for rent for many, many years. And that kind of local initiative is representative of what the party would try to do nationally
Okay, we
and
want to
make
get back
more
to the
affordable
audience.
homes for rent available.
Okay.
Well, we touched on tuition fees a moment ago. Chance to talk about it in detail now. A question from Dr. Colin Simpson, who's a university lecturer here in international business.
Thanks very much. I'm very pleased because my question takes up this theme which Martin mentioned earlier of younger people being cheated out of their future life chances. My question is, if elected, would you support and actively work towards the elimination of student fees and writing off of student loans?
Adam.
Yeah, it's very clearly in the Green Party manifesto, and it has been for years now. This is something that we've banged the drum on absolutely consistently. Interestingly, I read today that all 4 of the parties represented here have at some point promised the abolition of tuition fees, and you can play yourself a fun game on whether that's actually ever happened once any of them's reached government as well. But the Green Party have been absolutely consistent on this point. It's the abolition of tuition fees, the reintroduction of maintenance grants, and the actual writing off of existing student debt as well.
And Keith.
I believe Corbyn is a man of his word. He's been consistent throughout his career. He has a lot of critics, but I think you can't say anything other than he actually sticks to his line. He's made a promise to scrap tuition fees. When Corbyn is Prime Minister, that will happen.
And Martin.
Actually, we have twice gone into elections promising to abolish tuition fees, and both times we ended up in coalitions. The first time was actually the government of Scotland, where we went into coalition with Labour, and we did get that policy through, and it was a Lib Dem policy and not a Labour policy, and that is why there are no tuition fees in Scotland. The second time, it was going into national government, famously with the Conservatives, and that all went horribly wrong. And I think it was a complete political own goal and a mistake, and I think we were wrong to compromise on that. But remember, it was a Tory policy. So we would be very brave to put the abolition of tuition fees in our manifesto this time. But we have put the reinstatement of maintenance grants as a start for the least well-off students.
Alex,
and personally, I would want to abolish
I have
tuition
to
fees
say,
altogether.
Respectfully, Martin, that was one of the most disingenuous answers I have ever heard. The reality is, in the Lib Dem manifesto, it says nothing about getting rid of tuition fees because you know it's not Lib Dem policy. And when there was a vote when you were the MP, where Labour conducted a motion to reduce tuition fees from 9,000 to 6,000, you voted against it. So we need to be clear with the people about what we're saying here. Now, I'm going to give you a policy which a lot of people will not. Can I just make the point? Let me just finish and you can come back.
To increase tuition fees.
Okay. Let me just
I've
make
been a
the point.
consistent opponent of that policy.
Okay.
I've always been in favour of abolishing tuition fees, and I remain so today.
Let me make the point. Okay. The point is, so far as the OECD is concerned, they say that England is the only country in the OECD which has developed a sustainable approach to this issue of tuition fees. Now, I know they're not popular, I know they are high, but we have to have a sustainable system, and I think we should bear the following in mind. England has got record numbers of people coming from all backgrounds, that's BME backgrounds, people from all demographic backgrounds. Last year was the most diverse we've ever had. Second, if you look at Scotland, which is a useful control, the Sutton Trust, no less, has said that Scotland faces a shocking access gap, because the limitation on numbers means that it increasingly is becoming middle-class students who are able to go, and those from deprived backgrounds are not able to go. The reality is also the government is putting money in, 450 to up to 750 million, to support the most deprived students, so that we can have people, if they want to go to university, they can. And as
Alex,
I say, more people are doing it in England than they are in Scotland.
Thank you. We'll get back to the audience for some responses.
Very quick response here from Colin, who asked the question. What do you make of what you heard?
Well, I think there's a basic philosophical distinction here to be made between people who think that education is a cost and people who think that it's a public investment.
Absolutely.
And I have to say that it's quite clear to me that the Conservatives, supported by the Lib Dems during the coalition, just considered education to be a massive cost, and they sold young people.
That's simply not true, actually.
Martin, I'm going to just pick up some... All right, quick response, then we're going to come back to the audience. Okay.
It was a Liberal Democrat policy to abolish tuition fees. That is still my position. It was actually the position taken in the actual vote by most Liberal Democrat backbenchers.
But it wasn't the party's position at the last election.
It was the party's position at the last election. And the position has to be, if you go into coalition with a much stronger, bigger second other party, who in this case wanted to push up tuition fees, you sometimes have to compromise, okay? And we were not in a position to dictate to the Conservative Party that it had to abandon its policy on tuition fees.
Let's go back to the audience. Lady on the end here.
Yes, I would say it wasn't really a compromise when you have such high rates of interest, as the Labour chap said, 6.2%, I thought. And not only that, but the debt is compounding until 6 months after graduation, by which time it actually requires a salary of over £40,000 in order to service that debt.
Although students are
and I
actually
would
paying less
also
per
argue
month
with Mr Chalk that actually the OECD chap, those figures were based on the Plan 1 and not Plan 2. And that's the sustainability thing is completely unknown yet, and it's I think it's probably very unlikely that it is sustainable in the long run.
Let me bring in a couple more people very quickly before we move on. Key point to remember here, of course, if you are in favour of abolishing tuition fees, that needs paying for. How is that going to be paid for? Think about that if we're going to come to you. Let me come to you.
Hi there. As a parent of a student, obviously I'd be very pleased to hear that there would be no more tuition fees to pay. However, I'm the finance director here at the university, and I'd just like to know what assurances the parties can give about how universities would be funded to give students the facilities and the student experience they deserve.
Okay, let's ask Keith. What assurances can you give as to how universities will be funded?
Well, I haven't got the exact figures to hand, but the Labour Party is committed to education for the people of this country, and that obviously includes funding the universities to give a proper education. I can't really say much more because I don't have the actual figures, if there are any figures in our
I mean, the Labour Party has
manifesto
already
on that.
announced that it's going to raise taxes quite substantially in order to cover the 37 billion that's going to be given to the health service. This is presumably on top of that.
In the sort of the costings, obviously you take all the outgoings and you take all the incomings and you match them together. So it's not a matter of one matches the other. It's the total amount in each case. The total outgoings and the total incomings are matched in our manifesto's costings.
Adam, how would the Green Party propose that this was going to be funded?
That's always the question we get a lot, so you think I'd be quite prepared for that, wouldn't you? So our last couple of manifestos were absolutely fully costed because as a smaller party you've got to have some credibility, especially if you're saying you're spending money. The one thing that we should know about student loans is that at the moment 70% of them are due to be defaulted. So actually if you think about it, we're only having to actually cover the cost of 30% of it to actually be in that position to a certain extent. The Green Party, and it's a huge thing to go into, plan a radical overhaul of the tax system. I mean, at the moment, the corporation tax paid in the UK is the lowest in the G20 countries. So we can stand for the companies making a profit here to actually pay more tax. Those who should be paying their tax should actually be paying it. A friend of mine owns a business in Cheltenham. He's got 100 employees. Last year, he paid more tax than Facebook paid in the United Kingdom. So actually, it's not as if the money's not there. We've got more billionaires this year than we had last year. The money is there. It's just about what our priorities are and where we're going to put that money to use.
Okay.
Let's take our next question from Fabiola Partica, who's from Cheltenham and is also with Friends of the Earth.
Hi. EU environment laws have led to cleaner air, bathing water and protection from the countryside and wildlife in the UK. If elected, will you promise to ensure all the environmental protections gained as being part of the EU are fully maintained in UK law, and will you support actions to ensure our environment and nature improves over time? Also, how would you achieve this?
Okay, so Alex, assuming that we are going to continue with the Brexit process, how will you ensure these environmental laws?
Absolutely. No, it's a very good question, if I may be permitted to say so. So I've signed a declaration which is prepared by Green Alliance that says precisely this. That this must, you know that? You should give me the thumbs up. Yeah. So this basically says that Brexit must not be the occasion upon which we roll back the environmental protections. There were real problems, no doubt, with being in the European Union, and we don't need to talk about all of those. But one of the good things that came from it, I think, was the fact that our beaches did get cleaner and there were some important strictures that were put in place. I think it's firmly in the UK's national interest for us to continue with those. And I should say this, I don't detect anything amongst my colleagues in Parliament that suggests this must be the moment where we want to become the dirty man of Europe. Absolutely not. We need to have more blue belt around our 14 overseas territories. We need more maritime conservation zones. We need to do more to get rid of microbeads, more flora and fauna, more diversity, 11 million more trees. These are things we want, a strong environment in a post-Brexit world.
Keith, as we know, the Labour Party would continue also with the Brexit process. Same question for you.
but we certainly want to preserve the environmental protections that we have under the EU. We're committed, Labour Party are committed to the Paris Agreement on climate change, and we certainly seek to have greener energy. We also a green energy and nuclear energy mix, and we do want to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. Now, of course, when you talk about environment protections in the EU, environment is a moving thing, and actually things change over time. So we want to actually be able to sort of move with the times. If we just have a set now, we might not keep up with EU regulations. One issue, I think, is fracking, which I believe Alex Chalk has actually voted to agree that there is fracking underneath our national parks. Rig outside, but the fracking goes inside. Yeah, I believe the British Geological Survey has said that actually there is a threat, or there's a possible threat to the pollution and the groundwater because of fracking in that situation. Obviously, the science is not absolutely clear, but I really feel that was going back on an agreement made by David Cameron earlier. And I'm disappointed that Alex Chalk voted for fracking in our national parks.
Martin, a brief answer from you, please.
Well, we had a whole range of environmental measures that the Lib Dems managed to get through while in government, which are all now being reversed. In 2 years of Conservative government, we've had cuts to support for onshore wind, to solar subsidies, the zero carbon homes policy has been abolished, the Green Deal for existing housing has been stopped without any replacement, and they've sold off our Green Investment Bank, which is the world's first that we set off, and it now looks, according to a select committee, as though we may miss our climate change targets. So this is not a government that I would trust with the environment. And I'm very proud that, again, the Liberal Democrats have put a whole range of very strong environmental measures in our manifesto, including commitments to a Zero Carbon Britain Act that would aim to have binding targets to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions net to zero by 2050.
Martin, thank you. Adam, quick response from you.
That's going to be a difficult one, the environment. Thank you so much for putting the environment on the agenda at this hustings and actually just having it there. I think that's absolutely fantastic. The Green Party, of course, are very committed to the environment. It's our number one priority in our manifesto. It always has been, it always will be. We want to retain the EU laws that we've got, but we also want to go beyond those. We want to establish green investment hubs to make sure that there is ready money available to green firms investing in green technology. We want to impose green taxes on companies that are polluting and that have got dirty emissions. Huge renewable investment, divestment away from dirty fuels, no more nuclear, no more fracking, no more incineration, connected but green buffer zones, establishing the right in this country to have access to a green space, enshrining that as a right, and actually thinking about transport as well. If we look at transport at the moment, it's more expensive to get on a train and get on a bus than it is to drive at the moment, and that's been going up and up and up over the last 20 years. The cost of driving a car has gone down. Let's nationalise the railways, let's reinvest in our railways and make the railways cheap, encourage people to use those, and let's try and encourage people out of their cars rather than kicking them out of their cars.
Well, the United Kingdom Environmental Law Association has done some work on this and researched this, and this is going to the heart of Fabiola's question here. Broadly, they're saying that over the last 40 years or so, the EU environmental policy and legislation has, on balance, had a significant, very positive influence on environment in the UK. They've also said that depending on what Brexit deal is done, the options are pretty broad, actually. Little change, possibly, because the UK would still have to apply most environmental laws if we stayed in the European Economic Area, but it is up to the UK to decide what parts of EU law that we want to keep and what parts we don't. Fabiola, what did you make of the answers that you heard there?
Thank you. Well, actually, I've got a question to Alex, because you've mentioned about protecting our green belts. We also know about your plans and supports for building the cyber hub, which is being planned at our green spaces. How would you comment on this?
Okay, so there,
because I want to open it up to the audience.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so on the issue of the environment, I was saying that I want to keep the environmental protections which have been set out, well, most, those which are part of EU law, I think we should bring them into domestic law. There is no doubt we have to strike a balance in this country. One of the things we've got to do is produce more housing. And I think where there is an overwhelming need for housing so that young people can get on the housing ladder, as that lady over there was saying, that sometimes we're going to need to make certain adjustments, and particularly also on this cyber thing, which could bring jobs and opportunities for so many people in Cheltenham. So I think it's something we have to look at.
Very quickly, hands up if you want to be involved in this one. Lady over there.
I'd just like to say that I noticed when there was the referendum for whether we stayed in or out of Europe, that the green issues were completely and utterly missing from the entire argument. And I would just like to ask the 4 candidates, who all seem to be so sincere in their need to make a change for environmental issues in this country, if they would, if they get into power, put their money where their mouth is, because I feel that there's a lot of discussion about the environment as a politically correct stance to take, but we don't always see the results in the House of Commons. We see empty chambers when the environment's being discussed. And just in reference to our last question, ask young people what they're interested in. They're passionate about the environment, and yet we're in the powers of politics, it doesn't seem to come to very much when other more important issues about the economy are so-called being discussed. If we don't get our environment right, we're all lost.
Okay, let's move on to question number 6. Question number 6 is from Rhiannon Healy. Rhiannon is a first-year history student here at the university.
So what I'd like to know is, what opportunities do you intend to provide for generations to come in terms of employment and education, and how do you intend to secure these measures?
So, Adam, I'm going to start with you.
I absolutely agree. I can try and weave in the last 2 questions somehow. I absolutely agree with the last lady. I thought that's a fantastic and impassioned speech. The environment has to come first. We can't have an economy if we don't have an environment. The environment kind of is the whole of it. So that's where the Greens see the revolution. We can have an economic revolution through an environmental revolution. Climate change gets more and more severe as a danger as the years go by. Our inactivity makes it more and more dangerous, and the action that we need to take would have to be more severe. That's why I think we need an overhaul of our economy. We can make our economy a green and a fair one. If we massively invest in renewables technology, we can actually start building industrial jobs in the UK that are carbon neutral. We can have people manufacturing solar panels and wind turbines. Think of how much of our industry has been lost over the last 20 or 30 years, and I'm sure some of you know that that's kind of hollowed out parts of our communities. We can actually start rebuilding those communities by reskilling people, and that's where education comes in as well. Green apprenticeships would ensure that we are upskilling people to do green jobs that are ultimately investing in our economy and in our environmental future as well. So we can link those 2 things together.
Keith, so that was about what could be provided for generations to come in terms of employment and education specifically.
On education first, Labour would reverse the real terms cuts to school budgets that the Tories are planning to bring in. Currently, primary schools are facing a cut by 2020 of £400 per pupil, and secondary schools £550 per pupil. At the nearby St James Primary, that comes out at £435 or 4 teachers from that primary school. And Labour will reverse that. Labour believes that education is the heart of this country and the heart of each person. I mean, I was fortunate that I got to university, went to a good school and got to university, and that made all the difference to my life. And if actually also early years, I was a school teacher a while, and my head of maths, one of the few things he said he was a man of few words, but one of the few things he did say was that actually the groundwork is done in primary. That if you don't get the primary right, then the problems sort of build on. And Labour is committed to reducing class sizes in primary. As a teacher, I know that class sizes matter. If you've got a class of 40 or a class of 20, I can tell you can give a better teaching quality to a class of 20 than to a class of 40.
So, Martin, what can you promise, the Liberal Democrats promise young future generations?
Well, this is a good moment for cross-party agreement, actually, because I agree with Adam about the sustainable economy, and part of our 100 billion investment in infrastructure would also go to renewable energy and to sustainable transport. And so I think building up the green economy is part of making a more sustainable economy in the future. And actually I'd agree with Keith, and it is a Liberal Democrat manifesto commitment as well, to reverse all the cuts to frontline school and college budgets, protecting per pupil funding in real terms. And when it comes to the new national funding formula, which is threatening to cost 15 Cheltenham schools hundreds of thousands of pounds, which astonishingly Alex welcomed in Parliament on the 14th of December. You can check it out online. We have made a firm commitment to have a new national funding formula under which no existing school at all would lose out.
Okay,
and that is part of the £7 billion commitment to education that we've put in our manifesto.
Unfortunately, that was another desperately disingenuous remark from Martin.
Just to
put Martin's comments in context, in 2015, his party said that they would have balanced the budget by 2018, 6 months from now, right? In fact, 6 months from now, the UK will be overspending by £57 billion a year. So if the Lib Dems had been in and done their manifesto, there would have been far more severe cuts. And yet now he's saying, oh, well, we're going to put all this money in. So but that needs to be put in some sort of context. Just to correct the position that Martin also said about schools funding in Cheltenham, under the fair funding formula, overall Cheltenham will get 0.6% more. Now, it's quite right the formula isn't accurate, isn't as I would like it, but it's not correct to not put it in that wider context. But to turn to the points that have been made, just very quickly, briefly. If you want employment and education, we've got to have a strong economy. Of course we want all these services. Of course we do. But they've got to be paid for. And that means we've got to have a strong economy, a good Brexit deal, a competitive country, decent public finances, and all these apprenticeships. They won't come for free.
Thank you.
Right, the original question was about opportunities in employment and education posed by you, Rihanna. You're in education now and employment in the distant future. What have you heard there? What have you liked? Have you liked what you've heard?
I'm not sure really that my question was addressed as much. Like, I feel like it very much went off on a tangent about how we need to look into the economy. I mean, that's all very well and is good to say, but where is all this money expected to come from, you know? With university, what is it? It's become, my concern is it's become more of a privilege to have an education rather than a right.
Let me get some other comments from the audience here. Opportunities on education and employment. Gentleman on the front row here.
Thank you. Look, I just graduated, 2 years ago. When it comes to future, it really, I agree with Alex entirely. It's about opportunities. What I'm quite disappointed in, actually, with the Lib Dems, Labour and Green, is there is some real middle-class snobbery going on here that higher education is the only way forward. It's not. It comes in apprenticeships, it comes in jobs, and it's only with the Conservatives that we currently have record high numbers of employment, we have record numbers of apprenticeships. Well, don't laugh, it's true. And that's
Lib Dem policy and coalition, actually.
We need to get some more comments here. Comments on what you've heard, please. Yes.
Hello, sorry, it's probably going to come back to this actually, but as somebody that is also a teacher myself and that trained to teach in the further education sector, and it's nice that between the two of you have acknowledged teaching. However, the college and the further education sector has been dissected, like it doesn't exist anymore. If I wanted to get a job teaching English A-level, which I would love to do, I wish myself all the best of luck because they just don't exist anymore. So it's not a case of just restoring the funding, as Martin said. It's a case of actually getting the colleges back. They've gone. They're not here anymore. Okay.
All right, we need to move on to our final question of the night. And panel, if you would, very brief answers if you would, maximum of a minute each here. If there was one thing that you would change about Cheltenham over the next 5 years, what would it be?
Martin, I'm going to start with you.
Well, apart from Cheltenham Town consistently beating Forest Green Rovers now they're in the Football League, it would be to restore a full-time A&E at Cheltenham General. I mean, the last time I checked the other morning, there was a half-hour wait at Cheltenham General A&E after a night of diverting ambulances to Gloucester Royal, and the wait at Gloucester Royal was 6.5 hours, and it clearly can't cope. And Alex has asked for an urgent care centre, which is equivalent to a minor injuries unit, but I think we just need 2 full A&Es.
Okay,
and it requires the national funding, though, to make that possible.
Keith, briefly.
Well, I agree with Martin on that, but to add my own sort of view, a different one, I do think the cycle tracks and the cycling in this town could do a lot of work. I'm not a cyclist myself, I used to be, but compared to sort of Holland and Sweden, Germany, our cycle tracks are really pretty poor, to say the least.
Adam, I'm sure you don't disagree with that.
Those two have nicked my answers, actually. No. I'd say what, referring back to a point made earlier, I think that must be the first time I've been called a middle-class snob, because I'm going to have to take that back to my mum. I catch the bus to work every day, and I absolutely hate the fact that so many people are probably driving short distances within this town because we've got this deregulated for-profit bus service. I'd love to put the buses back under regulation and get people back on it.
Yeah. And Alex?
Our piece is breaking out. I certainly agree on cycles, but I think at one scene, the biggest priority for our town has got to be restoring nighttime A&E. The point is, I want to see an urgent care centre as a stepping stone to fully functioning, fully staffed nighttime A&E. That is the overwhelming priority for the town.
Thank you very much indeed, and that's all we've got time for. Thank you to all the panellists, thank you to you in the audience, thank you to you at home who've been watching via Facebook Live and listening to our student radio station Tone Radio. Just one more reminder, it's very important, you've got until Monday to register to vote if you haven't already. This is how you do it. And you can go online and find out as well using the hashtag Generation Vote. A special thanks to all our School of Media students who brought this production to you this evening, and a very good night to all of you. Have a safe journey home.
Well done.